Good evening, folks. Apologies for the little bit of disruption at the start. Repeating myself also, I just need to fix that. Always a great start to the stream when you've got not one but two sets of technical difficulties. There we go. That's better. That's better. Um, well, thank you very much for joining me. This is a continuation of our stream from yesterday. So this week I've been doing, this will be my third charity stream for Great Ormond Street Hospital as part of that Oh My Gosh campaign for this year. Without retreading too much ground, Great Ormond Street Hospital, obviously, well, hopefully, obviously, is an amazing charity. The reason I am particularly passionate about raising money for them is I was in Great Ormond Street Hospital when I was 6 years old. I had a kidney removed, and without making too much of a big deal about it, yeah, they saved my life, and so an opportunity to raise money is something I will always do when I can. So what we are doing tonight is we are continuing essentially our story time. So last night we read the first part of Robert Louis Stevenson's classic Treasure Island, and that's what we're going to be continuing tonight. We'll see how far we go. I've started a little later than I intended, but that's fine. We read the first part yesterday. I'd like to read the second part today. We will see how we get on with the third part. Third part, in theory, has fewer chapters, but yeah, we'll see how it is for page count. Not sure. Not sure how we'll get on. Also, it depends on my voice holds up. Still a little bit under the weather here, so if it seems like it's going to be uncomfortable for me to carry on, clearly I'm not going to do that. And as before, apologies for any mispronunciations that might come up during this. Always the bane of reading something live without the benefit of editing. We'll just carry on forwards. So, brief recap for those who have not read the book before. I said at the end of part one, Jim Hawkins, our protagonist, has encountered the pirate Billy Bones, who was very mysterious. Billy Bones was presented by the black spot by a blind pirate who clearly he knew from his previous years as a pirate himself. Billy Bones died as a result of the shock from this, and Jim and his mother managed to go through Billy Bones' chest and find the map to Treasure Island. And we have just had a little bit of exposition and discovery with our other characters, Dr. Livesey and Squire Trelawney, who have decided that they are going to head off to Treasure Island to try and find Captain Flint's treasure. So, I think without further ado, I think I'll take a quick swig of drink and we'll get into part two. Right. Part 2, The Sea Cook. Chapter 7, Go to Bristol. It was longer than the squire imagined ere we were ready for the sea, and none of our first plans, not even Dr. Livesey's, of keeping me beside him, could be carried out as we intended. The doctor had to go to London for a physician to take charge of his practice, the squire was hard at work in Bristol, and I lived on at the Hall under the charge of old Rudreth, the gamekeeper, almost a prisoner, but full of sea dreams and the most charming anticipations of strange islands and adventures. I brooded by the hour together over the map, all the details of which I well remembered. Sitting by the fire in the housekeeper's room, I approached that island in my fancy from every possible direction. I explored every acre of its surface. I climbed 1,000 times to that tall hill they call the Spyglass, and from the top enjoyed the most wonderful and changing prospects. Sometimes the isle was thick with savages with whom we fought, sometimes full of dangerous animals that hunted us, but in all my fancies nothing occurred to me so strange and tragic as our actual adventures. So the weeks passed on till one fine day there came a letter addressed to Dr. Livesey, with this addition, to be opened in the case of his absence by Tom Redruth or young Hawkins. Obeying this order, we found, or rather I found, for the gamekeeper was a poor hand at reading anything but print, the following important news. Old Anchor Inn, Bristol, March 1st, Dear Livesey, as I do not know whether you are at the Hall or still in London, I send this in double to both places. The ship is bought and fitted. She lies at anchor ready for sea. The never imagined a sweeter schooner. A child might sail her. 200 tons, name Hispaniola. I got her through my old friend Blandly, who has proved himself throughout the most surprising trump. The admirable fellow literally slaved in my interest, and so, I may say, did everyone in Bristol, as soon as they got wind of the port we sailed for. Treasure, I mean. Redruth, said I, interrupting the letter. Dr. Livesey will not like that. The squire has been talking, after all. Well, who's a better right? Growled the gamekeeper. A pretty rum so if Squire ain't to talk to Dr. Livesey, I should think. At that, I gave up all attempts at commentary and read straight on. Blandly himself found the Hispaniola, and by the most admirable management got her for the merest trifle. There is a class of men in Bristol monstrously prejudiced against Blandly. They go to the length of declaring that this honest creature would do anything for money, that the Hispaniola belonged to him, and that he sold it to me absurdly high, the most transparent calumnies. None of these dare, however, to deny the merits of the ship. So far, there was not a hitch. The workpeople, to be sure, riggers and what-not, were most annoyingly slow, but time cured that. It was the crew that troubled me. I wished a round score of men, in case of native buccaneers or the odious French, and I had the worry of the deuce itself to find so much as half a dozen, till the most remarkable stroke of fortune brought me the very man that I required. I was standing on the dock when, by the merest accident, I fell in talk with him. I found he was an old sailor, kept a public house, knew all the seafaring men in Bristol, had lost his health ashore, and wanted a good berth as cook, to get to sea again. He had hobbled down there that morning, he said, to get a smell of the salt. I was monstrously touched, so would you have been, and out of pure pity I engaged him on the spot to be the ship's cook. Long John Silver he is called, and has lost a leg, but that I regarded as a recommendation, since he lost it in his country's service under the immortal Hawke. He has no pension, Livesey. Imagine the abominable age we live in. Well, sir, I thought I had only found a cook, but it was a crew I discovered. Between Silver and myself, we got together a few days a company of the toughest old salts imaginable. Not pretty to look at, but fellows, by their faces, of the most indomitable spirit. I declare that we would fight a frigate. Long John even got rid of 2 out of the 6 or 7 I had already engaged. He showed me in a moment that they were just the sort of freshwater swabs we had to fear in an adventure of importance. I am in the most magnificent health and spirits, eating like a bull, sleeping like a tree, yet I shall not enjoy a moment till I hear my old tarpaulins trampling round the capstan. Seaward ho, hang the treasure, it is the glory of the sea that has turned my head. So now, Lizzie, come post, do not lose an hour, if you respect me. Let young Hawkins go at once to see his mother, with Redruth for the guard, and then both come full speed to Bristol. John Trelawney. Postscript. I did not tell you that Blandly, who, by the way, is to send a consort after us if we don't turn up at the end, by the end of August, had found an admirable fellow for sailing master, a stiff man, which I regret, but in all other measures, or in all other respects, a treasure. Long John Silver unearthed a very competent man for a mate, a man named Arrow. I have a boatswain who pipes, Lucy, so things shall go man-o'-war fashion on board the good ship Hispaniola. I forgot to tell you that Silver is a man of substance. I know of my own knowledge that he has a banker's account, which he has never been overdrawn. He leaves his wife to manage the inn, and as she is a woman of colour, a pair of old bachelors like you and I may be excused for guessing that it is the wife quite as much as health that sends him back to roving. J.T. P.P.S. Hawkins may stay one night with his mother. J.T. You can fancy the excitement into which that letter put me. I was half beside myself with glee, and if ever I despised a man, it was old Tom Redruth, who could do nothing but grumble and lament. Any of the under gamekeepers would gladly have changed places with him, but such was not the squire's pleasure. And the squire's pleasure was like the law among them all. Nobody like old Redruth would have dared so much as even to grumble. Next morning, he and I set out on foot for the Admiral Benbow, and there I found my mother in good health and spirits. The captain, who had so long been a cause of so much discomfort, was gone where the wicked cease from troubling. The squire had had everything repaired and the public rooms and the signs repainted, and had added some furniture, above all a beautiful armchair for mother in the bar. He had found her a boy as an apprentice, also so that she could not want help while I was gone. It was on seeing the boy that I understood for the first time my situation. I had thought up to that moment of the adventures before me, not at all of the home that I was leaving, and now, at the sight of this clumsy stranger who was to stay here in my place beside my mother, I had my first attack of tears. I am afraid I led that boy a dog's life, for as he was new to the work, I had 100 opportunities of setting him right and putting him down, and I was not slow to profit by them. The night passed, and the next day, after dinner, Redruth and I were afoot again and on the road. I said good-bye to mother, and the cove where I had lived since I was born, and the dear old Admiral Benbow, since he was repainted, no longer quite so dear. One of my last thoughts was of that captain who had so often strode along the beach with his cocked hat, his sabre-cut cheek, and his old brass telescope. Next moment we had turned the corner, and my home was out of sight. The mail picked us up about dusk at the Royal George on the Heath. I was wedged in between Redruth and a stout old gentleman, in spite of the swift motion and the cold night air. I must have dozed a great deal from the very first, and then slept like a log up hill and down dale through the stage after stage, for when I was awakened at last, it was by a punch in the ribs, and I opened my eyes to find that we were standing still before a large building in a city street, and that the day had already broken a long time. "Where are we?" I asked. "Bristol," said Tom. "Get down." Mr. Trelawney had taken up his residence at an inn far down the dock, so superintend the work upon the schooner. Thither we must now to walk, and our way, to my great delight, lay along the quays and beside the great multitude of ships of all sizes and rigs and nations. In one, sailors were singing at their work, in another there were men aloft high above my head, hanging to threads that seemed no thicker than a spider's. Though I had lived by the shore all my life, I seemed never to have been near the sea till then. The smell of tar and salt was something new. I saw the most wonderful figureheads that had all been far over the ocean. I saw, besides, many old sailors with rings in their ears and whiskers curled in ringlets and tarry pigtails and a swaggering, clumsy sea walk, and if I had seen as many kings or archbishops, I could not have been more delighted. And I was going to see myself, to sea in a schooner with a piping boatswain and a pigtailed singing seaman, to sea, bound for an unknown island, and to seek for buried treasure. While I was still in this delightful dream, we came suddenly in front of a large inn, and met Squire Trelawney, all dressed out like a sea officer, in stout blue cloth, coming out of the door with a smile on his face and a capital imitation of a sailor's walk. "Here you are," he cried, "and the doctor came last night from London. Bravo! The ship's company complete." "Sir," cried I, "when do we sail?" "Sail?" says he. "We sail tomorrow." Chapter 8. At the Sign of the Spyglass. When I had done breakfasting, the squire gave me a note addressed to John Silver at the Sign of the Spyglass, and told me I should easily find the place by following the line of the docks and keeping a bright lookout for a little tavern with a large brass telescope for sign. I set off, overjoyed at this opportunity to see some more of the ships and seamen, and picked my way among a great crowd of people and carts and bales, for the dock was now at its busiest, till I found the tavern in question. It was a bright enough little place of entertainment. The sign was newly painted, the windows had neat red curtains, the floor was cleanly sanded. There was a street on each side and an open door on both, which made the large, low room pretty clear to see in spite of the clouds of tobacco smoke. The customers were mostly seafaring men, and they talked so loudly that I hung at the door, almost afraid to enter. As I was waiting, a man came out of a side room, and at a glance I was sure he must be Long John. His left leg was cut off close by the hip, and under the left shoulder he carried a crutch, which he managed with a wonderful dexterity, hopping about upon it like a bird. He was very tall and strong, with a face as big as a ham, plain and pale, but intelligent and smiling. Indeed, he seemed in the most cheerful spirits, whistling as he moved about among the tables, and a merry word or a slap on the shoulder for the more favoured of his guests. Now, to tell you the truth, from the very first mention of Long John in Squire Trelawney's letter, I had taken a fear in my mind that he might prove to be the very one-legged sailor whom I had watched for so long at the old Benbow. But one look at the man before me was enough. I had seen the captain, the black dog, and the blind man Pew, and I thought I knew what a buccaneer was like, a very different creature, according to me, from this clean and pleasant-tempered landlord. I plucked up courage at once, crossed the threshold, and walked right up to the man where he stood, propped on his crutch, talking to a customer. "Mr. Silver, sir?" I asked, holding out the note. "Yes, my lad," said he. "Such is my name, to be sure. And who may you be?" And then, as he saw the squire's letter, he seemed to me to give something almost like a start. "Oh," said he, quite loud, and offering his hand, "I see. You are our new cabin boy. Pleased I am to see you." And he took my hand in his large, firm grasp. Just then one of the customers at the far side rose suddenly and made for the door. It was close by him, and he was out in the street in a moment. But his hurry had attracted my notice, and I recognised him at a glance. He was a tallow-faced man, wanting 2 fingers, who had come first to the Admiral Benbow. "Oh," I cried, "stop him, it's Black Dog." "I don't care 2 coppers who he is," cried Silver. "He hasn't paid his score. Harry, run and catch him." One of the others, who was nearest the door, leapt up and started the pursuit. "If he were Admiral Hawke, he shall pay his score," cried Silver, and then, relinquishing my hand, "Who did you say he was?" he asked. "Black what?" "Dog, sir," said I. "Has Mr. Trelawney not told you of the buccaneers? He was one of them." "So?" cried Silver. "In my house? Ben, run and help Harry. One of those swabs, was he? Was that you drinking with him, Morgan? Step up here." The man, whom he called Morgan, an old grey-haired, mahogany-faced sailor, came forward pretty sheepishly, rolling his quid. "Now, Morgan," said Long John very sternly, "you never clapped your eyes on that black dog before, did you now?" "Not I, sir," said Morgan with a salute. "You didn't know his name, did you?" "No, sir." "By the powers, Tom Morgan, it's as good for you," exclaimed the landlord. "If you had been mixed up with the like of that, you would never have put another foot in my house. You may lay to that." "And what was he saying to you?" "I don't rightly know, sir," answered Morgan. "Do you call that a head on your shoulders, or a blessed dead-eye?" cried Long John. "Don't rightly know, don't you? Perhaps you don't happen to rightly know who you are speaking to, perhaps. Come now, what was he jawing? Voyages, captains, ships? Pipe up, what was it?" "He was a-talking of keel-hauling," answered Morgan. "Keel-hauling, was you? And a mighty suitable thing too, and you may lay to that. Get back to your place for a lubber, Tom." And then, as Morgan rolled back to his seat, Silver added to me in a confidential whisper. That was very flattering, as I thought. "He's quite an honest man, Tom Morgan, only stupid, and now—" And he ran on again, aloud. "Let's see, Black Dog. No, I don't know the name, not I. Yet I kind of think yes, I've seen the swab. He used to come here with a blind beggar, he used." "That he did, you may be sure," said I. "I knew that blind man too. His name was Pew." "It was," cried Silver, now quite excited. "Pew, that was his name for certain. Ah, he looked a shark, he did. And if we run down this Black Dog, now there'll be news for Captain Trelawney. Ben's a good runner. Few seamen run better than Ben. He should run him down hand over hand by the powers. He taught a keel-hauling, did he? I'll keel-haul him." All the time he was jerking out these phrases, he was stumping up and down the tavern on his crutch, slabbing tables with his hand, and giving such a show of excitement as would have convinced an Old Bailey judge or a Bow Street runner. My suspicions had been thoroughly reawakened on finding Black Dog at the spyglass, and I watched the cook narrowly. But he was too deep and too ready and too clever for me, and by the time the 2 men had come back out of the breath and confessed they had lost the track in the crowd, and been scolded like thieves, I would have gone bail for the innocence of Long John Silver. "See here now, Hawkins," said he. "Here's a blessed hard thing on a man like me now, ain't it? There's Captain Trelawney. What's he to think? Here I have this confounded son of a Dutchman sitting in my own house drinking of my own rum. Here you comes and tells me of it plain, and here I let him give us all the slip before my blessed deadlights. Now, Hawkins, you do me justice with the captain. You're a lad, you are, and you're as smart as paint. I see that when you first come in. Now, here it is. What could I do with this old timber I hobble on? When I was an A.B. Master Mariner, I'd have come up alongside of him, hand over hand, and broached him in a brace of old shakes, I would. But now, and then all of a sudden, he stopped, and his jaw dropped as though he'd remembered something. The score, he burst out. 3 goes the rum. Why shiver my timbers if I hadn't forgotten my score? And falling on the bench, he laughed until the tears run down his cheeks. I could not help joining, and we laughed together, peal after peal, till the tavern rang again. "Oh, what a precious old sea calf I am," he said at last, wiping his cheeks. "You and me should get on well, Hawkins, for I'll take my davy I should be rated ship's boy. But come now, stand by to go about. This won't do. Duty is duty, messmates. I'll put on my old cockerel hat and step along of you to Captain Trelawney and report this here affair. But mind you, it's serious, young Hawkins, and neither you nor me's come out of it with what I should be so bold as to call credit. Nor you neither, says you, not smart, none of the pair of us smart. Dash my buttons, that was good and about my score." And he began to laugh again, and that so heartily that though I did not see the joke as he did, I was again obliged to join him in his mirth. On our little walk along the quays, he made himself a most interesting companion, telling me about the different ships that we passed by, their rig, tonnage, and nationality, explaining the work that was going forward, how one was discharging, another taking in cargo, and a third making ready for sea, and every now and then telling me of some little anecdote of ships or seamen, or repeating a nautical phrase till I had learned it perfectly. I began to see that this was one of the best possible shipmates. Then we got to the inn. The squire and Dr. Livesey were seated together, finishing a quart of ale with a toast in it, before they should go aboard the schooner on a visit of inspection. Long John told the story from first to last, with a great deal of spirit and the most perfect truth. That was how it were now, weren't it, Hawkins, he would say now and again, and I could always bear him entirely out. The 2 gentlemen regretted that Black Dog had got away. We all agreed there was nothing to be done. And after he had been complimented, Long John took his crutch and departed. "All hands aboard by 4 this afternoon," shouted the squire after him. "Aye, aye, sir," cried the cook in the passage. "Well, squire," said Dr. Livesey, "I don't put much faith in your discoveries as a general thing, but I will say John Silver suits me." "The man's a perfect trump," declared the squire. "And now," added the doctor, "Jim may come on board with us, may he not?" "To be sure he may," says Squire. "Take your hat, Hawkins, and we'll see the ship." Chapter 9. Powder and Arms. The Hispaniola lay some way out. We went under the figureheads and round the sterns of many other ships, and their cables sometimes grated underneath our keel, and sometimes swung above us. At last, however, we got alongside, and were met and saluted as we stepped aboard by the mate, Mr. Arrow, a brown old sailor with earrings in his ear and a squint. He and the squire were very thick and friendly, but I soon observed that things were not the same between Mr. Trelawney and the captain. This last was a sharp-looking man who seemed angry with everything on board, and was soon to tell us why, for we had hardly got down into the cabin when a sailor followed us. "Captain Smollett, sir, axing to speak with you," said he. "I am always at the captain's orders. Show him in," said the squire. The captain, who was close behind his messenger, entered at once and shut the door behind him. "Well, Captain Smollett, what have you to say? All well, I hope, all shipshape and seaworthy?" "Well, sir," said the captain, "better speak plain, I believe, even at the risk of offence. I don't like this cruise. I don't like the men. I don't like my officer. That's short and sweet." "Perhaps, sir, you don't like the ship?" inquired the squire, very angry, as I could see. "I can't speak as to that, sir, not having seen her tried," said the captain. "She seems a clever craft, more I can't say." "Possibly, sir, you may not like your employer either," said the squire. But here Dr. Livesey cut in. "Stay a bit," said he, "stay a bit. No use of such questions as that to produce ill feeling. The captain has said too much, or he hath said too little, and I'm bound to say that I require an explanation of his words. You don't, you say, like this cruise. Now why?" "I was engaged, sir, on what we called sealed orders to sail this ship for that gentleman where he should bid me, said the captain. So far so good, but now I find that every man before the mast knows more than I do. I don't call that fair now, do you? No, said Dr. Livesey, I don't. Next, said the captain, I learn we are going after treasure. Hear it from my own hands, mind you. Now, treasure is ticklish work. I don't like treasure voyages on any account, and I don't like them, above all, when they are secret, and when, begging your pardon, Mr. Trelawney, the secret has been told to the parrot. Silver's parrot? Asked the squire. It's a way of speaking, said the captain. Blabbed, I mean. It's my belief neither of you gentlemen know what you are about, but I'll tell you my way of it, life or death, and a close run. That is all clear, and I dare say true enough, replied Dr. Livesey. We take the risk, and we are not so ignorant as you believe us. Next you say you don't like the crew. Are they not good seamen? I don't like them, sir, returned Captain Smollett. And I think I should have had the choosing of my own hands, if you go to that. Perhaps you should, replied the doctor. My friend should, perhaps, have taken you along with him, but the slight, if there be one, was unintentional. You don't like Mr. Arrow? I don't, sir. I believe he's a good seaman, but he's too free with the crew to be a good officer. A mate should keep himself to himself, shouldn't drink with the men before the mast. Do you mean he drinks? Cried the squire. No, sir, replied the captain. Only he's too familiar. Well, now, in the short and long of it, captain? Asked the doctor. Tell us what you want. Well, gentlemen, are you determined to go on this cruise? Like iron, answered the squire. Very good, said the captain. Then, as you heard me very patiently saying things I could not prove, hear me a few words more. They are putting the powder and the arms in the forehold. Now you have a good place under the cabin. Why not put them there? First point. Then you are bringing 4 of your own people with you, and they tell me some of them are to be berthed forward. Why not give them the berths here beside the cabin? Second point. Any more? Asked Mr. Trelawney. One more, said the captain. There's been too much blabbing already. Far too much, agreed the doctor. I'll tell you what I've heard myself, continued Captain Smollett, that you have a map of an island, and there's crosses on the map to show where treasure is, and that the island lies, and then he named the latitude and longitude exactly. I never told that, cried the squire, to a soul. The hands know it, sir, returned the captain. Livesey, must have been you or Hawkins, cried the squire. It doesn't matter who it was, replied the doctor, and I could see that neither he nor the captain paid much regard to Mr. Trelawney's protestations. Neither did I, to be sure. He was so loose a talker, yet in this case I believe he was really right, and that nobody had told the situation of the island. Well, gentlemen, continued the captain, I don't know who has this map, but I make it a point it shall be kept secret even from me and Mr. Arrow, otherwise I would ask you to let me resign. I see, said the doctor. You wish us to keep this matter dark, and to make a garrison of the stern part of the ship manned with my friend's own people, provided with all the arms and powder on board. In other words, you fear a mutiny. Sir, said Captain Smollett, with no intention to take offence, I deny your right to put words in my mouth. No captain, sir, would be justified in going to sea at all if he had ground enough to say that. As for Mr. Arrow, I believe him thoroughly honest. Some of the men are the same. All may be for what I know, but I am responsible for the ship's safety and the life of every man jack aboard of her. I see things going, as I think, not quite right, and I ask you to take certain precautions or let me resign my berth. And that's all. Captain Smollett, began the doctor with a smile, did ever you hear the fable of the mountain and the mouse? You'll excuse me, I dare say that you remind me of that fable. When you came in here, I'll stake my wig that you meant more than this. Doctor, said the captain, you are smart. When I came here, I meant to get discharged. I had no thought that Mr. Trelawney would hear a word. No more I would, cried the squire. Had Livesey not been here, I should have seen you to the deuce. As it is, I have heard you. I will do as you desire, and I think the worse of you. That's as you please, sir, said the captain. You'll find I do my duty. And with that, he took his leave. Trelawney, said the doctor, contrary to all my notions, I believe you have managed to get 2 honest men on board with you. That man and John Silver. Silver, if you like, said the squire, but as for that intolerable humbug, I declare I think his conduct unmanly, unsailorly, and downright un-English. Well, said the doctor, we shall see. When we came on deck, the men had already begun to take out the arms and powder, yo-hoing at their work, with the captain and Mr. Arrow stood by superintending. The new arrangement was quite to my liking. The whole schooner had been overhauled. 6 berths had been made astern out of what had been the after part of the main hold, and this set of cabins was only joined by the galley and forecastle by a sparred passage on the port side. It had been originally meant that the captain, Mr. Arrow, Hunter, Joyce, the doctor, and the squire was to occupy these 6 berths. Now Redruth and I were to get 2 of them, and Mr. Arrow and the captain were to sleep on deck in the companion, which had been enlarged on each side till you might almost have called it a roundhouse. Very low it was still, of course, but there was room to swing 2 hammocks, and even the mate seemed pleased with the arrangement. Even he, perhaps, had been doubtful as to the crew, but that is only for guess, for as you shall hear, we had not long the benefit of his opinion. We were all hard at work, changing the powder in the berths, when the last man or 2, and Long John along with them, came off in a shore boat. The cook came up the side like a monkey for cleverness, and as soon as I saw what he was doing, "So ho, mates," he says, "what's this?" "We're a changing of the powder, Jack," answers one. "Why, by the powers," cried Long John, "if we do, we'll miss the morning tide." "My orders," said the captain shortly. "You may go below, my man. Hands will want supper." "Aye, aye, sir," answered the cook, and touching his forelock, he disappeared at once in the direction of the galley. "That's a good man, Captain," said the doctor. "Very likely, sir," replied Captain Smollett. "Easy with that, men, easy." He ran on to the fellows who were shifting the powder, and then suddenly observing me examining the swivel we carried amidships, a long brass 9. "Here, you ship's boy," he cried, "out of that. Off with you to the cook and get some work." And then, as I was hurrying off, I heard him say quite loudly to the doctor, "I'll have no favourites on my ship." I assure you I was quite the squire's way of thinking, and hated the captain deeply. Chapter 10. The Voyage. All that night we were in a great bustle getting things stowed in their place, and boatfuls of the squire's friends, Mr. Blandley and the like, coming off to wish him a good voyage and a safe return. We never had a night at the Admiral Benbow when I had half the work, and I was dog-tired when, a little before dawn, the boatswain sounded his pipe and the crew began to man the capstan bars. I might have been twice as weary, yet I would not have left the deck. All was so new and interesting to me, the brief commands, the shrill note of the whistle, the men bustling to their places in the glimmer of the ship's lanterns. "Now, Barbecue, tip us a stave," cried one voice. "The old one," cried another. "Aye, aye, mate," said Long John, who was standing by with his crutch under his arm, and at once broke out in the air in words I knew so well. 15 men on a dead man's chest, and then the whole crew bore chorus, "Yo ho ho," and a bottle. And at the third ho, drove the bars before them with a will. Even at that exciting moment it carried me back to the old Admiral Benbow in a second, and I seemed to hear the voice of the captain piping in the chorus. But soon the anchor was short up, soon it was hanging dripping at the bows, soon the sails began to draw and the land and shipping to flit by on either side, and before I could lie down to snatch an hour of slumber, the Hispaniola had begun her voyage to the Isle of Treasure. I am not going to relate that voyage in detail. It was fairly prosperous. The ship proved to be a good ship, the crew were capable seamen, and the captain thoroughly understood his business. But before came the length of Treasure Island, 2 or 3 things had happened which required to be known. Mr. Arrow, first of all, turned out even worse than the captain had feared. He had no command among the men, and people did what they pleased with him. But that was by no means the worst of it, for after a day or 2 at sea, he began to appear on deck with hazy eye, red cheeks, stuttering tongue, and other marks of drunkenness. Time after time he was ordered below in disgrace. Sometimes he fell and cut himself. Sometimes he lay all day long in his little bunk on one side of the companion. Sometimes for a day or 2 he would be almost sober and attend to his work at least passably. In the meantime, we could never make out where he got the drink. That was the ship's mystery. Watch him as we pleased, we could do nothing to solve it. When we asked him to his face, he would only laugh if he were drunk, and he would sober deny solemnly that he'd ever tasted anything but water. He was not only useless as an officer, and a bad influence among the men, but it was plain that at this rate he would soon kill himself outright, so nobody was surprised nor very sorry when one dark night, with a head sea, he disappeared entirely and was seen no more. "Overboard," said the captain. Well, gentlemen, that saved the trouble of putting him in irons. But there we were, without a mate, and it was necessary, of course, to advance one of the men. The boatswain, John Anderson, was the likeliest man aboard, and though he kept his old title, he served in a way as mate. Mr. Trelawney had followed the sea, and his knowledge made him very useful, for he often took a watch himself in easy weather, and the coxswain, Israel Hands, was a careful, wily, old, experienced seaman who could be trusted at a pinch with almost anything. It was a great confidant of Long John Silver, and so the mention of his name leads me on to speak of our ship's cook, Barbecue, as the men called him. Aboard ship he carried his crutch by a lanyard around his neck, to have both hands as free as possible. It was something to see him wedge his foot of the crutch against a bulkhead and, propped against it, yielding to every movement of the ship, get on with his cooking, like someone safe ashore. Still more strange was it to see in the heaviest of weather across the deck. He had a line or two rigged up to help him across the widest spaces. Long John's earrings, they were called, and he would hand himself from one place to another, now using his crutch, now trailing it alongside by the lanyard as quickly as another man could walk. Yet some of the men who had sailed with him before expressed their pity to see him so reduced. "He's no common man, Barbecue," said the coxswain to me. "He had good schooling in his younger days, and can speak like a book when so minded, and brave. A lion's nothing alongside of Long John. I've seen him grapple for and knock their heads together, him unarmed." All the crew respected and even obeyed him. He had a way of talking to each and doing everybody some particular service. To me he was unwearingly kind, and always glad to see me in the galley, which he kept as clean as a new pin, the dishes hanging up burnished, and his parrot in a cage in one corner. "Come away, Hawkins," he would say. "Come and have a yarn with John. Nobody more welcome than yourself, my son. Sit you down and hear the news. Here's Captain Flint," I calls my parrot. "Captain Flint, after the most famous buccaneer. Here's Captain Flint predicting success to our voyage. Wasn't you, Captain?" And the parrot would say with great rapidity, "Pieces of 8, pieces of 8, pieces of 8, till you wondered that it was not out of breath, or till John threw his handkerchief over the cage. "Now that bird," he would say, "is maybe 200 years old, Hawkins. They live forever, mostly. And if anybody's seen more wickedness, it must be the devil himself. She sailed with England, the great Captain England, the pirate. She's been to Madagascar and Malabar and Surinam and Providence and Portobello, and was at the fishing up of the wrecked plate ships. It's there she learned pieces of 8, and little wonder. 350,000 of them, Hawkins. She was at the boarding of the Viceroy of the Indies out of Goa, she was, and to look at her you would think she was a babby. But you smelt powder, didn't you, Captain?" "Stand by and go about," the parrot would scream. "Ah, she's a handsome craft, she is," the cook would say, and give her sugar from his pocket. And then the bird would peck at the bars and swear straight on, passing belief for wickedness. "There," John would add, "you can't touch pitch and not be mucks, lad. Hear this poor old innocent bird of mine swearing blue fire, and none the wiser you may lay to that." She would swear the same, in a manner of speaking, before Chaplin. And John would touch his forelock with a solemn way he had made me think he was the best of men. In the meantime, the squire and Captain Smollas were still on pretty distant terms with one another. The squire made no bones about the matter. He despised the captain. The captain, on his part, never spoke but when he was spoken to, and then sharp and short and dry, and not a word wasted. He owned, when driven into the corner, that he seemed to have been wrong about the crew, that some of them were brisk as he wanted to see, and all had behaved fairly well. As for the ship, he had taken a downright fancy to her. She'll lie a point nearer the wind than a man has a right to expect of his own married wife, sir. But, he would add, all I say is, we're not home again, and I don't like the cruise. The squire at this would turn away and march up and down the deck, chin in the air. "Trifle more of that, man," he would say, "and I shall explode." We had some heavy weather, which only proved the qualities of the Hispaniola. Every man on board seemed well content, and they would have been hard to please if they had been otherwise, for it is my belief there was never a ship's company so spoiled since Noah put to sea. Double grog was going on the least excuse. There was duff on odd days, and as for instance, if the ship heard it had been any man's birthday, and always a barrel of apples standing broached in the waist for anyone himself who'd take a fancy. Never knew good come of it, said Captain to Dr. Livesey. Spoil forecastle hands, make devils, that's my belief. But good did come of the apple barrel, as you shall hear, for it had not been for that, we would have no note of warning and might all have perished by the hand of treachery. This was how it came about. We had run at the trades to get the wind of the island we were after. I'm not allowed to be more plain. And now we were running down for it with a bright lookout day and night. It was about the last day of our outward voyage by the largest computation. Some time that night, or the latest before noon on the morrow, we should sight the treasure island. We were heading south-southwest and had a steady breeze abeam and a quiet sea. The Hispaniola rolled steadily, dipping her bowsprit now and with a whiff of spray. All was drawing aloud aloft. Everyone was in the bravest spirits because we were now so near an end of the first part of our adventure. Now, just after sundown, when all my work was over and I was on my way to my berth, it occurred to me that I should like an apple. I ran on deck, the watch all forward looking out for the island. The man at the helm was watching the luff of the sail and whistling away gently to himself. And that was the only sound except the swish of the sea against the bows and around the sides of the ship. In I got bodily into the apple barrel and found there was scarce an apple left. But sitting down there in the dark, with the sound of the waters and the rocking movement of the ship, I'd either fallen asleep or was at the point of doing so when a heavy man sat down with rather a clash close by. The barrel shook as he leaned his shoulders against it, and I was just about to jump up when the man began to speak. It was Silver's voice, and before I'd heard a dozen words, I would not have shown myself for all the world, but lay there, trembling and listening, in extreme fear and curiosity, for from these dozen words I understood that the lives of all the honest men aboard depended on me alone. Chapter 11. What I Heard in the Apple Barrel. No, not I, said Silver. Flint was captain. I was quartermaster, along on my timber leg. Same broadside I lost my leg. Old Pew lost his deadlights. It was a master surgeon, him that amputated me, out of college and all, Latin by the basket and what not. But he was hanged like a dog and sun-dried like the rest at Corso Castle. That was Robert's men. That was, and combed of changing names upon their ships, Royal Fortune and so on. Now what a ship was christened, so let her stay, I says. So it was the Cassandra's brought us all safe home from Malabar, after England took the Viceroy of the Indies. So it was with the old Walrus, Flint's old ship, as I've seen amuck with the red blood and fit to sink with gold. Ah, cried another voice, that of the youngest hand on board, and evidently full of admiration. He was a flower of the flock, was Flint. Davis was a man too, by all accounts, said Silver. I never sailed along of him, first when England, then with Flint, that's my story, and now here on my own account, in a manner of speaking. I laid by 900 safe from England and 2,000 after Flint. That ain't bad for a man before the mast, all safe in the bank. Tain't earning now. It's saving does it, you may lay to that. Where's all England's men now? I don't know. Where's Flint's? Why, most of them aboard here, and glad to get the duff. Been begging before, and some of them. Old Pew had lost his sight, and might have thought shame, spends £1,200 in a year like a lord in Parliament. Where's he now? Well, he's dead now and under hatches. But for 2 years before that, shiver my timbers, the man was starving. He begged and he stole and he cut throats and starved at that by the powers. Well, tain't much use after all, said the young seaman. Tain't much use for fools, you may lay to that. That for nothing, cried Silver. But now you look here, you are young, you are, and you're as smart as paint. I see that when I set my eyes on you, and I'll talk to you like a man. You may imagine now how I felt when I heard this abominable old rogue addressing another in the very same words as flatteries he'd used on myself. I think, if I had been able, that I would have killed him through the barrel. Meantime, he ran on, like supposing he was overheard. Little supposing he was overheard. Here it is about gentlemen of fortune. They lives rough and they risk swinging, but they eat and drink like fighting cocks. And when a cruise is done, why, it's hundreds of pounds instead of hundreds of farthings in their pockets. Now, the most goes for rum and a good fling and to sea again in their shirts. But that's not the course I lay. I puts it all away, some here, some there, and none too much anywheres by the reason of suspicion. I'm 50, mark you, once back from the cruise. I set up gentleman in earnest. Time enough too, says you. Ah, but I've lived easy in the meantime, never denied myself, owned nothing a heart desires, and slept soft and ate dainty in all my days but when but at sea. But how did I begin? Before the mast, like you. Well, said the other, but all the other money's gone now, ain't it? You daren't show your face in Bristol after this. Why might you suppose it was? Asked Silver derisively. At Bristol, in banks and places, answered his companion. It were, said the cook. It were when we weighed anchor, but my old missus has it all now, and the spyglass is sold, lease and goodwill and rigging, and the old girl's off to meet me. I will tell you where, for I trust you, but it'd make jealousy among the mates. And can you trust your missus? Asked the cook. Gentlemen of fortune, returned the cook, usually trust little among themselves, and right they are, and you may lay to it. But I have a way with me, I have. When a mate brings a slip on his cable, one as knows me, I mean, it won't be in the same world with old John. That was some that feared of Pew, and some that was feared of Flint, but Flint his old self was feared of me. Feared he was, and proud. They were the roughest crew afloat, was Flint's. The devil himself would have feared to go to sea with them. Well, now I tell you, I'm not a boasting man, and you see yourself how easy I keep company. But when I was quartermaster, lambs wasn't the world for Flint's old buccaneers. Ah, you may be sure of yourself in old John's ship. Well, I tell you now, replied the lad. Been half a quarter like a job till I had this talk with you, John, but there's my hand on it now. And a brave lad you were, and smart too, answered Silver, shaking hands so heartily that all the barrel shook. And a finer figurehead for a gentleman of fortune I never clasped my eyes on. By the time I had begun to understand the meaning of their terms by a gentleman of fortune, they plainly meant neither more nor less than a common pirate. And the little scene that I had overheard was the last act in the corruption of one of the honest hands, perhaps the last one left aboard. But on this point I was soon to be relieved, for Silver giving a little whistle, a third man strolled up and sat by the party. Dick Square, said Silver. Oh, I know Dick was square, returned the voice of the coxswain Israel Hands. He's no fool, is Dick. And he turned his squid and spat. But look here, he said. Here's what I want to know, Barbecue. How long are we going to stand off and on like blessed bumboat? I've had most enough of Captain Smollett. He's hazed me long enough, by thunder. I want to go into that cabin, I do. I want their pickles and wines and that. Israel, said Silver, your head ain't much account, nor ever was. And you're able to hear, I reckon. Leastways your ears are big enough. Now, here's what I say. You'll berth forward, and you'll live hard, and you'll speak soft, and you'll keep sober till I give the word, and you will lay to that, my son. Well, I don't say no, do I? Growled the coxswain. What I say is when. That's what I say. When? By the powers, cried Stillbart. Well, now, if you want to know, I'll tell you when. The last moment I can manage, and that's when. Here's a first-rate seaman, Captain Smollett, sails the blessed ship for us. Here's this squire and doctor with a map and such. I don't know where it is, do I? No more than you do, says you. Well, then, I mean the squire and the doctor shall find the stuff and help us get it aboard, by the powers. Then we'll see. If I was sure of you all, sons of double Dutchmen, I'll have Captain Smollett navigate us halfway back again before I struck. Why, we're all seamen aboard here, I should think, said the lad Dick. We're all forecastle hands, you mean, snapped Silver. We can steer a course, but who's to set one? That's what all you gentlemen split on, first and last, if I had my way. I'd have Captain Smollett work us back into the trades at least, and then we'd have no blessed miscalculations and a spoonful of water a day. But I know the sort you are. I'll finish them at the island as soon as the Blunt's on board, and a pity it is. But you're never happy till you're drunk. Split my sides, I've a sick heart to sail with the likes of you. Easy all, Long John, cried Israel. Who's a crossing of you? Why, how many tall ships think ye now have I laid aboard, and how many brisk lads drying in the sun at Execution Dock, cried Silver. And all for the same hurry and hurry and hurry, you hear me? I seen a thing or two at sea, I have. If you were to lay your course and point windward, you would hide in carriages, you would, but not you, I know you. You'll have a mouthful of rum tomorrow and go hang. Everybody knowed you was a kind of chaplain, John, and there's others as could hand and steer as well as you, said Israel. They liked a bit of fun, they did, but it wasn't so high and dry, nohow, and took their fling like jolly companions, every one. So, said Silver. Well, and where are they now? Hugh was that sort, and he died a beggar man. Flint was, and he died of rum at Savannah. Ah, there was a sweet crew they was. Only, where are they? But, asked Dick, when do we lay 'em at wood? When do we do with them anyhow? There's the man for me, cried the cook admiringly. That's what I call business. Well, what would you think? Put 'em ashore like maroons? That would have been England's way, or cut 'em down like much pork. That would have been Flint's, or Billy Bones. Billy was the man for that, said Israel. Dead men don't bite, says he. Well, he's dead now himself. He knows how long and short of it now. And if ever a rough hand came to port, it was Billy. Right you are, said Silver. Rough and ready, but mark you here, I'm an easy man. I'm quite the gentleman, says you. But this time it's serious. Duty is duty, mates. I give my vote. Death. When I'm in Parliament and riding in my coach, I don't want none of these sea lawyers and the captain are coming home unlooked for like the devil of prayers. Wait is what I say, but when the time comes, why, let her rip. John, said the coxswain, you're a man. You'll say so, Israel, when you see, said Silver. Only one thing I claim. I claim Trelawney. I'll wring that calf's head off his body with these hands, Dick, he added, breaking off. You just jump up like a sweet lad and get me an apple to wet my pipe like. You may fancy the terror I was in. I should have leaped out and run for it had I found the strength, but my limbs and heart alike misgave me. I heard Dick beginning to rise, and then someone seemingly stopped him, and the voice of Hans exclaimed, "Oh, stow that! Don't you go sucking off that bilge, John. Let's go and go of the rum." "Dick," said Silver, "I trust you. I've a gauge on a keg, mind. There's a key, and you'll fill a pannikin and bring it up." Terrified as I was, I could not help thinking of myself that this might have been how Mr. Arrow got the strong waters that destroyed him. Dick was gone but a little while, and during his absence Israel spoke straight on in the cook's ear. It was a word or two that I could catch, and yet I gathered some important news, for beside other scraps that tended to the same purpose, this whole clause was audible. Not another man of them gine. Hence there were still faithful men on board. When Dick returned, one after another of the trio took the pannikin and drank, one to luck, another with a "Here's to old Flint," and Silver himself saying, in a kind of song, "Here's to ourselves, and hold your luff, plenty of prizes, and plenty of duff." Just then a sort of brightness fell upon me into the barrel, and looking up I found the moon had risen and was silvering the mizzen top and shining white on the luff of the foresail, and almost at the same time the voice of the lookout shouted, "Land ho!" Chapter 12. Council of War. There was a great rush of feet across the deck. I could hear people tumbling up from the cabin and the forecastle and slipping in an instant outside my barrel. I dived behind the foresail, made a double towards the stern, and came out above the open deck in time to join Hunter and Dr. Livesey in the rush for the weather bow. There all hands were already congregated. A belt of fog had lifted amongst simultaneously with the appearance of the moon. Away to the southwest of us we saw two low hills, about a couple of miles apart, and rising behind one of them a third and higher hill whose peak was still buried in the fog. All three seemed sharp and conical in figure. So much I saw almost in a dream, for I had not yet recovered from my horrid fear of a minute or two before. And then I heard the voice of Captain Smollett issuing orders. The Hispaniola was laid a couple of points nearer the wind, and now sailed a course that would just clear the island on the east. "And now, men," said the captain, with all was sheeted home, "has any of you ever seen that land ahead?" "I have, sir," said Silver. "I've watered there with the trader I was cooking." "The anchorage is on the south, behind an inlet, I fancy?" asked the captain. "Yes, sir. Skeleton Island, they call it. It were a main place for pirates once, and a hand we had on board knowing all their names for it. That hill on the north they call the foremast hill, and there are 3 hills in a row running southward, fore, main, and mizzen, sir. But the main, that's the big un, with the cloud on it, they usually calls the spyglass, by reason of it lookout that kept when they was in the anchorage cleaning, for it is in cleaning ship, sir, asking your pardon. I have a chart here," said Captain Smollett. "See if that's the place." Long John's eyes burned in his head as he took the chart, but by the fresh look on the paper I knew he was doomed to disappointment. this was not the map we had found in Billy Bones's chest, but an accurate copy, complete in all things, names and heights and soundings, with the single exception of the red crosses and the written notes. Sharp as much had been his annoyance, Silver had the strength of mind to hide it. "Yes, sir," said he, "this is the spot, to be sure, and very prettily drawn out. But might have done that, I wonder. The pirates were too ignorant, I reckon. Aye, here it is. Captain Kidd's Anchorage, just the name my shipmate called it. There was a strong current run along the south, and then away northward, up to the west coast. Right you was, sir, says he, to haul your wind and keep the weather of the island. Leastways, it was such your intention as to enter and careen, and there ain't no much better place for it in these waters." "Thank you, my man," said Captain Smollett. "I'll ask you later on to give us a help. You may go." I was surprised at the coolness by which John avowed his knowledge of the island, and I own I was half frightened when I saw him drawing nearer to myself. I did not know, to be sure, that I had overheard his counsel from the apple barrel, and yet I had by this time taken such a horror of his cruelty, duplicity, and the power I could scarce conceal a shudder when he laid his hand upon my arm. "Ah," says he, "this here is a sweet spot, this island. A sweet spot for a lad to get ashore on. You'll bathe, and you'll climb trees, and you'll hunt goats, you will. You'll get aloft on them hills like a goat yourself. Why, it makes me young again. I was going to forget my timber leg, I was. It's a pleasant thing to be young and have 10 toes, and you may lay to that. When you want to go a bit exploring, you just ask old John, and he'll put up a snack for you to take along." And clapping me in the friendliest way upon my shoulder, he hobbled off forward and went below. Captain Smollett, the squire, and Dr. Livesey were talking together on the quarter-deck. As anxious as I was to tell them my story, I durst not interrupt them openly. When I was still casting about in my thoughts to find some probable excuse, Dr. Livesey called me to his side. He had left his pipe below, and being a slave to tobacco, had meant that I should fetch it. But as soon as I was near enough to speak and not to be overheard, I broke immediately. "Doctor, let me speak. Get the captain and squire down to the cabin, and then make some pretence to send for me. I have terrible news." The doctor changed his countenance a little, but next moment he was master of himself. "Thank you, Jim," he said quite loudly. "That's all I wanted to know," as if he had asked me a question. And with that he turned on his heel and rejoined the other two. They spoke together for a little, and though none of them startled or raised voice or as much as whistled, it was plain enough that Dr. Livesey had communicated my request. For the next thing that I heard was the captain giving an order to Job Anderson, and all hands were piped on deck. "My lads," said Captain Smollett, "I've a word to say to you. This land we have sighted is the place we've been sailing for. Mr. Trelawney, being a very open-handed gentleman, as we all know, has just asked me a word or two, and I was able to tell him that every man on board had done his duty, aloud and aloft, and had never asked to see it done better. Why, he and I and the doctor are going below to the cabin to drink your health and luck, and you'll have grog served out to you for you to drink our health and luck. I'll tell you what I think of this. I think it handsome. And if you think as I do, you'll give a good sea cheer for the gentleman that does it." The cheer followed. That was a matter of course, but it rang out so full and hearty, I confess I could hardly believe it were the same men that were plotting for our blood. "One more cheer for Captain Smollett," cried Long John when the first had subsided. And this was also given with a will. On the top of that, the three gentlemen went below, and not long after, word was sent forward that Jim Hawkins was wanted in the cabin. I found them all three seated round the table, a bottle of Spanish wine and some raisins before them, and the doctor smoking away with his wig on his lap, and that I knew that the sign was he was agitated. The stern window was open, for it was a warm night, and you could see the moon shining behind on the ship's wake. "Now, Hawkins," said the squire, "you have something to say. Speak up." I did as I was bid, and as short as I could make it, told the whole details of Silver's conversation. Nobody interrupted me till I was done, nor did any one of the three of them make so much as a movement, but they kept their eyes upon my face from first to last. "Jim," said Dr. Livesey, "take a seat." And they made me sit down at a table beside them, poured me out a glass of wine, filled my hands with raisins, and all three, one after another, and each with a bow, drank my good health and their service to me for my luck and courage. "Now, Captain," said the squire, "you were right and I was wrong. I owe myself an ass, and I wait your orders." "No more an ass as I, sir," returned the captain. "I never heard of a crew that meant to mutiny but showed signs before. But any man that lay that had an eye in his head to see the mischief and take steps accordingly. But this crew, he added, beats me. Captain, said the doctor, with your permission, that's Silver, a very remarkable man. You look remarkably well from a yardarm, sir, returned the captain. This is talk. This don't lead to anything. I see 3 or 4 points, and with Mr. Trelawney's permission, I'll name them. You, sir, are the captain. It is for you to speak, said Mr. Trelawney grandly. First point, began Mr. Smollett. We must go on, because we can't turn back. If I gave the word to go about, they would rise at once. Second point, we have time before us, at least until the treasure's found. Third point, there are faithful hands. Now, sir, it's got to come to blows sooner or later, and what I propose is to take time by the forelock, as the saying is, and come to blows some fine day when they least expect it. We can count, I take it, on your own home servants, Mr. Trelawney, as upon myself, declared the squire. 3, reckoned the captain. Ourselves make 7, counting Hawkins here. Now, about the honest hands? Most likely Trelawney's own men, said the doctor, those he had picked up for himself before he lit on Silver. Nay, replied the squire, Hans was one of mine. I did think I could trusted Hans, asked the captain. And to think they were all Englishmen, broke out the squire. Sir, I could find it in my heart to blow the ship up. Well, gentlemen, said the captain, the best that I can say is not much. We must lay to, if you please, and keep a bright lookout. It's trying on a man, I know. It would be pleasanter to come to blows, but there's no help for it till we know our men. Lay to and whistle for a wind. That's my view. Jim here, said the doctor, can help us more than anyone. The men are not shy with him, and Jim is a noticing lad. Hawkins, I put prodigious faith in you, added the squire. I began to feel pretty desperate at this, for I felt altogether helpless, and yet by an odd train of circumstances it was indeed through me that safety came. In the meantime, talk as we pleased. There were only 7 out of 26 on whom we knew we could rely, and out of the 7, 1 was a boy, so that the grown men on our side were 6 to their 19. Okay, that takes us to the end of part 2. How are we doing for time? It is 20 past 10, so I think we may well carry on into part 3, but I think I'll take like a brief 5 minutes in a second to rest my voice. Hello, people at Treat Your Geek. I can see you popped in. I really appreciate that. Before we take a quick break on this one, this is a charity stream to raise money for Great Ormond Street Hospital. We are reading our way through Treasure Island. We read part 1 yesterday evening. I've just read part 2, and I think we'll be going on to part 3 after a little break here. If you'd like to donate to Great Ormond Street Hospital, please just follow the QR code in the bottom right. We're aiming to try and make £100 this week. We're up to 30 already, so anything you could spare would be absolutely wonderful. Hey, Mash, no, I really do appreciate you popping in. For those who don't know, the reason I'm doing this is not only is Great Ormond Street Hospital an amazing charity in and of itself, but I was actually there when I was 6 years old. I went in with kidney failure, had a kidney taken out, and because of them, I'm alive today. So any opportunity for me to raise some money for Great Ormond Street Hospital. So if there is any money about, or if you just want to share the link, say what I'm doing and encourage people to come here, whether it's on socials, whether it's on Discord, that would be absolutely wonderful. So what I will do is I think I'll pop back on some music for a second. We're going to take a short break here, and I think we will be back in about 5 minutes. Does that sound all right? Okay, I will see you all shortly. All right, and welcome back. Okay, for those who have just joined us, well, we are midway through tonight's stream, probably a little over midway to be honest. This is a charity stream to raise money for Great Ormond Street Hospital, a charity very near and dear to my heart, as I was there myself when I was 6 years old and would not be here without the care that I was given there. So as part of Oh My Gosh week of this year, I'm just doing these charity streams to raise money for Great Ormond Street Hospital. If you would like to donate, this is through Tiltify. There is a link in the bottom right, so please feel to follow that. We are £30 towards our goal of £100. So if you'd like to donate something, that would be awesome. If you can't, I completely understand, but you know, a retweet of the go live or something like that would be just wonderful to try and bring people along. Or just saying that, you know, just kind of Share the link with people afterwards, share links to the VODs afterwards, because what we are doing is the slightly foolish task of I am reading the Robert Louis Stevenson classic Treasure Island over a couple of nights. Last night I read part 1, we've just finished part 2, and I think it's 6 parts on the top of my head. And now we're going to do part 3 before we probably call it a night after that, because I suspect my my voice will give out if I go on much longer than that. But I think because part 3 is relatively short, I think we will do that tonight. I think. Okay. So I'll take a quick swig of my drink again, and I think we'll get back into it. Part 3, My Shore Adventure. Chapter 13, How I Began My Shore Adventure. The appearance of the island when I came on deck the next morning was altogether changed. Although the breeze was now utterly ceased, we had made a great deal of the way during the night, were now lying bed-calmed upon half a mile to the south-east of the low eastern coast. Grey-coloured woods covered a large part of the surface. This even tint was indeed broken up by the streaks of yellow sand break in the lower lands, and many tall trees of the pine family outtopping the others, some singly, some in clumps, but the general colouring was uniform and sad. The hills ran up clear above the vegetation in spires of naked rock. They were all strangely shaped, and the spyglass, which was by 300 or 400 feet the tallest on the island, was likewise the strangest in configuration, running up sheer from almost every side and then suddenly cut off at the top like a pedestal to put a statue on. The Hispaniola was rolling scuppers under the ocean swell. The booms were tearing at the blocks, and the rudder was banging to and fro, and the whole ship creaking, groaning, and jumping like a manufactory. I had to cling tight to the backstay, and the world turned giddily before my eyes before I was good enough sailor when I was way on. This standing still and being rolled about like a bottle was a thing I had never learned to stand without a qualm or so. Above all in the morning, or on an empty stomach. Perhaps it was the look of the island, with its grey, melancholy woods and wild stone spires, and the surf we could both see and hear foaming and thundering on the steep beach. And at least, although the sun shone bright and hot, and the shore birds were fishing and crying all around us, and you would have thought anyone would have been glad to get to the land after being so long at sea, my heart sank, as the saying is, into my boots, for from my first look onward I hated the very thought of Treasure Island. We had a dreary morning's work before us, for there was no sign of any wind, and the boats had to be got out and manned, and the ship warped 3 or 4 miles round the coast of the island and up the narrow passage to the haven behind Skeleton Island. I volunteered for one of the boats, where I had, of course, no business. The heat was sweltering, and the men grumbled fiercely over their work. Anderson was in command of my boat. Instead of keeping the crew in order, he grumbled as loud as the worst. "Well," he said with an oath, "it's not forever." I thought this was a very bad sign, for up to that day the men had gone briskly and willingly about their business. For the very sight of the island had relaxed the cords of discipline. All the way in, Long John stood by the steersman and conned the ship. He knew the passage like the palm of his hand, and though the man in the chains got everywhere more water than was down in the chart, John had never hesitated once. "There's a strong scow with the ebb," he said, "and this here passage has been dug out, in a manner of speaking, with a spade. We brought up just where the anchor was in the chart, and about a third of a mile from each shore, the mainland on one side and Skeleton Island on the other. The bottom was clean sand. The plunge of our anchor sent up clouds of birds wheeling and crying over the woods, but in less than a minute they were down again, and all was once more silent." The place was entirely landlocked, buried in the woods, the trees coming right down to high water mark, and the shores most flatly, and the hilltops standing round at a distance in a sort of amphitheatre, one here, one there, 2 little rivers, or rather 2 swamps, emptied out into this pond, as you might call it, and the foliage around the part of the shore that had a kind of poisonous brightness. From the ship we could see nothing of the house or stockade. They had been quite buried among the trees. If it had not been for the chart of the Companion, we might have been first had there ever been anchored there since the island arose out of the seas. There was no breath of air moving, nor any sound, but that of the surf booming half a mile away among the beaches and among the rocks outside. A peculiar stagnant smell hung over the anchorage, a smell of sodden leaves and rotting tree trunks. I observed the doctor sniffing and sniffing like someone tasting a bad egg. "I don't know about treasure," he said, "but I'll stake my wig there's fever here." If the conduct of the men had been alarming in the boat, it became truly threatening when they had come aboard. They lay about the deck, growling together in talk. The slightest order was received with a black look and grudgingly and carelessly obeyed. Even the honest hands must have caught the infection, for there was not one man aboard to mend another. Mutiny, it was plain, hung over like a thundercloud. It was not only we of the cabin party who perceived the danger. Long John was hard at work, going from group to group, spending himself in good advice, and as, for example, no man could have shown a better. He fairly outstripped himself in willingness and civility. He was all smiles to everyone. If an order was given, John would be on his crutch in an instant with the cheeriest "Aye, aye, sir" in the world. And there was nothing else to do. He kept up one song after another as if to conceal the discontent of the rest. All the gloomy features of that gloomy afternoon, this obvious anxiety on the part of Long John Silver appeared the worst. We held a council in the cabin. "Sir," said the captain, "if I risk another order, the whole ship will come about our ears by the run. You see, sir, here it is. I get a rough answer, do I not? Well, if I speak back, Pikes will be going in the two shakes. If I don't, Silver will see there's something under that and the game's up. Now, we've only one man to rely on." "Who is that?" said the squire. "Silver, sir," returned the captain. "He's as anxious as you and I to smother things up. This is a tiff. He'd soon talk 'em out of it if you had a chance. And what I propose to do is give him the chance. Let's allow the men an afternoon ashore. If they all go, why, we'll fight the ship. If none of them go, well, we hold the cabin and God defend the right. If some go, you mark my words, sir, Silver will bring 'em aboard again as mild as lambs." It was so decided. Loaded pistols were served out to all the sure men. Hunter, Joyce, and Redruth were taken into our confidence and received the news with less surprise and a better spirit than we had looked for. And then the captain went on deck and addressed the crew. "My lads," he said, "we've had a hot day and are all tired and out of sorts. A turn ashore will hurt nobody. The boats are still in the water. You can take the gigs, and as many of please may go ashore for the afterward. I'll fire a gun half an hour before sundown." I believe the silly fellows must have thought that they would break their shins over treasure as soon as they were landed, for they all came out of their sulks in a moment and gave a cheer that started to echo in a far-away hill and sent the birds once more flying and squalling around the anchorage. The captain was too bright to be in the way. He whipped out of sight in a moment, leaving Silver to arrange the party, and I fancy it was as well he did so. Had he been on deck, he could no longer so much as pretended not to understand the situation. It was as plain as day. Silver was the captain, and a mighty rebellious crew he had of it. The honest hands, and I was soon to see prove that there were such on board, must have been very stupid fellows, or rather I suppose the truth was this, that all hands were disaffected by the example of the ringleaders, only some more, some less, and a few being good fellows in the main, could neither be led nor driven any further. It is one thing to be idle and skulk, and quite another to take a ship and murder a number of innocent men. At last, however, the party was made up. 6 fellows were to stay aboard. The remaining 13, including Silver, began to embark. Then it was there came into my head the first of the mad notions that contributed to save our lives. If 6 men were left by Silver, it was plain our party could not take and fight the ship, and since only 6 were left, it was equally plain that the cabin party had no present need of my assistance. It occurred to me at once to go ashore. In a jiffy I had slipped over the side and curled up the foresheets in the nearest boat, and almost at the same moment she shoved off. No one took notice of me, only the bow-oar saying, "Is that you, Jim? Keep your head down." But Silver, from the other boat, looked sharply over and called out to know if it were me, and from that moment I began to regret what I had done. The crews raced for the beach, but the boat I was in, having some start and being at once lighter and better manned, shot far ahead of the consort, and the boat had struck among the shoreside trees, and I had caught a branch and swung myself out and plunged into the nearest thicket, while Silver and the rest were still 100 yards behind. "Jim! Jim!" I heard him shout. But you may suppose I paid no heed. Jumping, ducking, and breaking through, I ran straight before my nose till I could run no longer. Chapter 14. First Blow. I was so pleased at having given the slip to Long John that I began to enjoy myself and look around me with some interest on the strange land that I was in. I had crossed the marshy tract full of willows, bulrushes, and odd, outlandish, swampy trees, and had now come upon the skirts of an open piece of undulating, sandy country, about a mile long, dotted with a few pines and a great number of contorted trees, not unlike the oak in growth, but pale in the foliage, like willows. On the far side of the open stood one of the hills, with two quaint, craggy peaks shining vividly in the sun. I now felt for the first time the joy of exploration. The isle was uninhabited. My shipmates I had left behind, and nothing lived in front of me but dumb brutes and fowls. I turned hither and thither among the trees. Here and there were flowering plants unknown to me. Here and there I saw snakes, and one raised his head from a ledge of rock and hissed at me with a noise not unlike the spinning of a top. Little did I suppose that there was a deadly enemy and that the noise was the famous rattle. Then I came to a long thicket of these oak-like trees, live or evergreen oaks. I heard afterwards they should be called, which grew low among the sand like brambles, the boughs curiously twisted, the foliage compact like thatch. The thicket stretched down from the top of one of those sandy knolls, spreading and growing taller as it went, until it reached the margin of the broad, reedy fen, through which the nearest of the little rivers soaked its way into the anchorage. The marsh was steaming in the strong sun, and the outline of the spyglass trembled through the haze. All at once there began to go a sort of bustle among the bulrushes. A wild duck flew up with a quack, another followed, and soon over the whole surface of the marsh a great cloud of birds hung screaming and circling in the air. I judged at once that some of my shipmates must be drawing near among the borders of the fen. Nor was I deceived, for soon I heard the very distant and low tones of a human voice, which, as I continued to give ear, grew steadily louder and nearer. This put me in a great fear, and I crawled under cover of the nearest live oak, and squatted there, hearkening as silent as a mouse. Another voice answered, and then the first voice, which I now recognised to be Silver's, once more took up the story and ran on for a long while in a stream, only now and again interrupted by the other. By the sound they must have been talking earnestly and almost fiercely, but no distinct words came to my hearing. At last the speakers seemed to have paused and perhaps have sat down, for not only did they cease to draw any nearer, but the birds themselves began to grow more quiet, and to settle again to their places in the swamp. And now I began to feel that I was neglecting my business, that since I had been so foolhardy as to come ashore with these desperadoes, the least I could do to overhear them in their councils, and that my plain and obvious duty was to draw as close as I could manage under the favourable ambush of the crouching trees. I could tell the direction of the speakers pretty exactly, not only by the sounds of their voices, but by the behaviour of the few birds that still hung in alarm above the heads of the intruders. Crawling on all fours, I made steadily but slowly towards them, till at last, raising my head to an aperture among the leaves, I could see clear down into the little green dell beside the marsh, and closely set about with trees, where Long John Silver and another of the crew stood face to face in conversation. The sun beat full upon them. Silver had thrown his hat beside him on the ground, and his great smooth blonde face, all shining with heat, was lifted to the other man's in a kind of appeal. "Mate," he was saying, "it's because I thinks gold dust of you, gold dust, and you may lay to that. If I hadn't took you like pitch, do you think there would be a warning of you? All's up. You can't make nor mend. It's to save your neck, and that I'm a speaking, and if one of the wild uns knew it, where I'd be, Tom. Now tell me, where'd I be?" "Silver," said the other man, and I observed he was not only red in the face, but spoke as hoarse as a crow, and his voice shook too like taut rope. "Silver," says he, "you're old and you're honest, or has the name for it, and you've money too, which lots of poor sailors hasn't, and you're brave, or I'm mistook. And will you tell me you'll let yourself be led away with that kind of mess of swabs? Not you. As sure as God sees you, I'd sooner lose my head. If I turn again my duty," and then all of a sudden he was interrupted by a noise. I had found one of the honest hands, while here in that same moment came news of another. Far away out in the marsh there arose all of a sudden a sound like the cry of anger, then another on the back of it, and then one horrid long-drawn scream. The rocks of the spyglass re-echoed it a score of times. The whole troop of marsh birds rose again, darkening heaven with a simultaneous whir, and long after the death yell was still ringing in my brain, silence had re-established its empire, and only the rustle of the redescending birds and the boom of the distant surges disturbed the languor of the afternoon. Tom had leapt at the sound, like a horse at the spur, but Silver had not winked an eye. He stood where he was, resting lightly on his crutch, watching his companion like a snake about to spring. "John," said the sailor, stretching out his hand. "Hands off," cried Silver, leaping back a yard, as it seemed to me with the speed and security of a trained gymnast. "Hands off if you like, John Silver," said the other. "It's a black conscience that can make you feared of me, but in heaven's name tell me, what was that?" "That," returned Silver, smiling away, but warier than ever, his eye a mere pinpoint in his big face, but gleaming like a crumb of glass. "That? Oh, I reckon that'll be Alan." And at this point Tom flashed out like a hero. "Alan!" he cried. "Then rest his soul for a true seaman. And as for you, John Silver, long you've been a mate of mine, but you're a mate of mine no more. If I die like a dog, I'll die in my duty. You've killed Alan, have you? Kill me too if you can, but I despise you." And with that the brave fellow turned his back directly on the cook to set off walking for the beach, but he was not destined to go far. With a cry, John seized the branch of a tree, whipped the crutch out of his armpit, and set the uncouth missile hurtling through the air. It struck poor Tom, point foremost, and with stunning violence right between the shoulders and the middle of his back. His hands flew up, he gave a sort of gasp, and fell. Whether he were injured much or little, none could ever tell. Like enough to judge from the sound, his back was broken on the spot. He had no time given to him to recover. Silver, agile as a monkey, even without leg or crutch, was on the top of him next moment, and had twice buried his knife up to the hilt in that defenceless body. From my place of ambush, I could hear him pant aloud as he struck the blows. I do not know what it is rightly is to faint, but I do know that for the next little while the whole world swam away from before me in a swirling mist. Silver and the birds and the tall spyglass hilltop going round and topsy-turvy before my eyes, and all manner of bells ringing and distant voices shouting in my ear. When I came again to myself, the monster had pulled himself together, his crutch under his arm, his hat upon his head. Just before him Tom lay motionless upon the sward, with the murderer minded not a whit, cleansing the blood-stained knife, and while upon a wisp of grass. Everything else was unchanged, the sun still shining mercilessly from the steaming marsh and the tall pinnacle of the mountain, and I could scarce persuade myself that murder had been actually done, and the human life cruelly cut short a moment before my eyes. But now John put his hand into his pocket, brought out a whistle, and blew upon it several modulated blasts that rang far across the heated air. I could not tell, of course, the meaning of the signal, but it instantly awoke my fears. More men would be coming. I might be discovered. They had already slain 2 of the honest people. After Tom and Alan, might not I come next? Instantly I began to extricate myself and crawl back again with what speed and silence I could manage to the more open portion of the wood. As I did so, I could hear hails coming and going between the old buccaneer and his comrades, and the sound of danger lent me wings. As soon as I was clear of the thicket, I ran as I never ran before, scarce minding the direction of my flight, so long as it led me from the murderers, and as I ran, fear grew and grew upon me till it turned into a kind of frenzy. Indeed, could anyone be more entirely lost than I? When the gun fired, how should I dare to go down to the boats among the fiends, still smoking from their crime? Would not the first of them that saw me wring my neck like a snipe's? Would not my absence itself be evidence to them of my alarm, and therefore of my fatal knowledge? It was all over, I thought. Goodbye to the Hispaniola, goodbye to the squire, the doctor, and the captain. There was nothing left for me but death by starvation, or death by the hands of the mutineers. All this while, as I say, I was still running, and without taking any notice, I had drawn near to the foot of the little hill with the 2 peaks, and had got into a part of the island where the live oaks grew more widely apart, and it seemed more like forest trees in their bearing and dimensions. Mingling with these were a few scattered pines, some 50, some nearer 70 feet high. The air too smelt more freshly than down beside the marsh, and here a fresh alarm brought me to a standstill with a thumping heart. Chapter 15. The Man of the Island. From the side of the hill, which was here steep and stony, and spout of gravel was dislodged and fell rattling and bounding through the trees. My eyes turned instinctively in that direction, and I saw a figure leap with great rapidity behind the trunk of a pine. What it was, whether bear or man or monkey, I could in no way tell. It seemed dark and shaggy, more I knew not, but the terror of this new apparition brought me to a stand. I was now, it seemed, cut off upon both sides, behind me the murderers, before me this lurking nondescript, and immediately I began to prefer the dangers that I knew to those I knew not of. Silver himself appeared less terrible in contrast than this creature of the woods, and I turned on my heel and looked sharply behind me over my shoulder, began to retrace my steps in the direction of the boats. Instantly the figure reappeared, made a wide circuit, began to head me off. As I was tired, and at any rate I had been as fresh as when I rose, I could see it was in vain for me to contend in speed with such an adversary. From trunk to trunk the creature flitted like a deer, running man-like on two legs, but unlike any man I had ever seen, stooping almost double as it ran. Yet a man it was, and there could no longer be any doubt of that. I began to recall what I had heard of cannibals. I was within an ace of calling for help, but the mere fact that he was a man, however wild, had somewhat reassured me, for my fear of Silver began to revive in proportion. I stood still, therefore, and cast about for some method of escape, and as I was so thinking, the recollection of my pistol flashed into my mind. As soon as I remembered I was not defenceless, courage glowed again in my heart, and I set my face resolutely from this man of the island, and walked briskly towards him. He was concealed by this time behind another tree trunk. He must have been watching me closely, for as soon as I began to move in his direction, he reappeared and took a step to meet me. Then he hesitated, drew back, came forward again, and at last, to my wonder and confusion, threw himself on his knees and held out his clasped hands in supplication. At that I once more stopped. "Who are you?" I asked. "Ben Gunn," he answered, and his voice sounded hoarse and awkward like a rusty lock. "I'm poor Ben Gunn, I am, and I haven't spoken with a Christian these 3 years." I could now see that he was a white man like myself, that his features were even pleasing. His skin, wherever it was exposed, was burnt by the sun. Even his lips were black, and his fair eyes looked quite startling in so dark a face. Of all the beggar men that I had seen or fancied, he was chief for raggedness. He was clothed in tatters of old ship's canvas and old sea cloth, and the extraordinary patchwork was all held together by a system of the most various and incongruous fastenings, brass buttons, bits of stick, and loops of tarry gaskin. About his waist he wore an old brass-buckled leather belt, which was one thing solid in his whole accoutrement. 3 years, I cried. "Were you shipwrecked?" "Nay, mate," he said, "marooned." I had heard the word. I knew it stood for a horrible kind of punishment common enough among the buccaneers, in which the offender is put ashore with a little powder and shot, and left behind on some desolate and distant island. "Marooned 3 years ago," he continued, "and lived on goats ever since, and berries and oysters. Wherever a man is, says I, a man can do for himself. But, mate, my heart is sore for Christian diet. You mightn't happen to have a piece of cheese about you now? No? Well, many's the long night I dreamed of cheese, toasted mostly, and woke up again, and here I were. If I ever can get aboard again, said I, you shall have cheese by the stone." All this time he had been feeling the stuff of my jacket, smoothing my hands, looking at my boots, and generally, in the intervals of his speech, showing a childish pleasure in the presence of a fellow creature. But at last my words he perked up into a kind of startled slyness. "If ever you can get aboard again, says you," he repeated. "Why now, who's to hinder you?" "Not you, I know," was my reply. "And right was you," he cried. "Now you, what do you call yourself, mate?" "Jim," I told him. Jim, says he, quite pleased apparently. "Well, now, Jim, I've lived that rough as you'd be ashamed to hear. Now, for instance, you wouldn't think I had a pious mother to look at me?" he asked. "Why, no, not in particular," I asked. "Ah, well," said he, "but I had remarkable pious, and I was a civil pious boy and could rattle off my catechism fast, and you wouldn't tell one word from another. And here's what it's come to, Jim," and it began with Chuck, Father and the Blessed Gravestones. That's what it began with, but it went further on that, and so my mother told me and predicted the whole thing, she did, the pious woman. But were Providence that put me here, I've thought in all but this here lonely island, and I'm back on piety. You don't catch me tasting rum so much, but just a thimbleful for luck. Of course, the first chance I have, I've bound I'll be good, and I see the way too. And Jim, looking all round him and lowering his voice to a whisper, I'm rich. I now felt sure that the poor fellow had gone crazy in his solitude. I suppose it must have shown the feeling in my face, for he repeated the statement hotly. Rich, rich, I says, and I'll tell you what, I'll make a man of you, Jim. Ah, Jim, you'll bless your stars, you will. You was the first that found me. And at this there came suddenly a lowering shadow upon his face, and he tightened his grasp upon my hand and raised a forefinger threateningly before my eyes. Now, Jim, you will tell true. That ain't Flint's ship, he asked. At this I had a happy inspiration. I began to believe that I had found an ally, and I answered him at once. It's not Flint's ship, and Flint is dead. But I'll tell you true as you tell me, there are some of Flint's hands aboard. Worse luck for the rest of us. Not a man with one leg, he gasped. Silver? I asked. Ah, Silver, says he. That were his name. He's the cook and the ringleader too. He was still holding me by the wrist, and at that he gave it quite a wring. If you were sent by Long John, he said, I'm as good as pork, and I know it. But where was you, do you suppose? I had made my mind up that moment, and by way of answer told him the whole story of our voyage and the predicament in which we found ourselves. He heard me with the keenest interest, and when I had done, he patted me on the head. You're a good lad, Jim, he said. And you're all in a clove hitch, aren't you? Well, you just put your trust in Ben Gunn. Ben Gunn's the men to do it. Would you think it likely now that your squire would prove a liberal-minded one in case of help? Him being in a clutch hive, as you remark. I told him the squire was the most liberal of men. Aye, but you see, returned Ben Gunn, I didn't mean giving me a gate to keep, but a suit of livery clothes and such. That's not my mark, Jim. What I mean is, would he be likely to come down to the tune of, say, £1,000 out of money that's as good as a man's own already? I'm sure he would, said I, and it was all hands were to share. And a passage home, he added with a look of great shrewdness. Why, I cried, the squire's a gentleman, and besides, if we got rid of the others, we should want you to help work the vessel home. Ah, said he, so you would, and he seemed very much relieved. Now I'll tell you what, he went on, so much as I tell you and no more. I were in Flint's ship when he buried the treasure, he and 6 strong seamen. He was ashore nigh on a week, and us standing off and on the old Walrus. One fine day up went the signal, and here comes Flint by itself in a little boat, and his head done up in a blue scarf. The sun was getting up, a mortal white, while he looked above the cutwater. And there he was, you mind, the 6 all dead, dead and buried. How he done it, not a man among us could make out. It was a battle, murder, and sudden death leastways, him against 6. Billy Bones was the mate, Long John was the quartermaster, and they asked him where the treasure was. Ah, says he, you can go ashore if you like, and stay, he says, but as for the ship, she'll beat up for more by thunder. That's what he said. Well, I was in another ship 3 years back, and we sighted this island. Boys, said I, here's Flint's treasure, let's land and find it. The captain was displeased at that, but my messmates were of a mind and landed. 12 days they looked for it, and every day they had the worst word for me, until one fine morning all hands went aboard. As for you, Benjamin Gunn, said they, here's a musket, they says, and a spade and a pickaxe. You can stay here and find Flint's money for yourself, they says. Well, Jim, 3 years have I been here, and not a bite of Christian diet from that day to this. But now, you look here, look at me. Do I look like a man before the mast? No, says you. Nor I weren't, neither, I says. And with that he winked and pinched me hard. Just you mention them words to your squire, Jim, he went on. Nor he weren't, neither, that's the words. 3 years he were the man of the island, light and dark, fair and rain, and sometimes he would maybe think upon a prayer, says you. And sometimes he would maybe think of his old mother, so be as she's alive, you'll say. And the most part of Gunn's time, this is what you'll say, the most part of this time was took up with another matter, and then you'll give him a nip, like I do. And he pinched me again in the most confidential manner. Then, he continued, then you'll up and you'll say, Gunn is a good man, you'll say, and he puts a precious sight more confidence, a precious sight, mind that, in a gentleman born than these gentlemen of fortune, having been one himself. Well, I said, I don't understand one word you've been saying. That's neither here nor there. Well, how am I to get aboard? Ah, said he, that's the hitch for sure. Well, there's my boat that I made with my 2 hands. I keep her under the white rock. If the worst comes to the worst, we might try that after dark. Hi, he broke out. What's that? But just then, although the sun had still an hour or two to run, all the echoes of the island awoke and bellowed to the thunder of the cannon. They have begun to fight, I cried. Follow me. I began to run towards the anchorage, my terrors all forgotten, while close at my side the marooned man in his goatskin trotted easily and lightly. Left, left, he said. Keep to your left hand, mate Jim. Under the trees with you. There's where I killed my first goat. They don't come down here. They're all mast-headed and all on their mountings for the fear of Benjamin Gunn. Ah, and there's the cemetery, he must have meant. You see the mounds? I come here and prayed nows and thens when I thought maybe a Sunday would be about due. It weren't quite a chapel, but it seemed more solemn like, and then says you, Ben Gunn was short-handed, no chaplain, nor so much a Bible as a flag, you says. So we kept talking as I ran, neither expecting nor receiving an answer. The cannon shot was followed after a considerable interval by a volley of small arms. Another pause, and then, not a quarter of a mile in before me, I beheld the Union Jack flutter in the air above a wood. Okay, I think that's a perfect time to stop as my my voice is failing me. We've got to the end of part 3 of that one. And I hope, unless something comes up, we'll be continuing tomorrow evening where we will do at the very least part 4, potentially part 5. We will see how we get on. I can't imagine we'll finish the whole novel tomorrow, but it'll be a split between tomorrow and Sunday. So thank you very much for joining me for this. I hope you've been enjoying it. This is my first time reading an entire novel aloud. I'm very much enjoying it, though it's certainly taxing on the voice, and it's having to sight read very, very quickly. But I am very much enjoying it. As I said, if you would like to kind of contribute, I mean, this is all a charity endeavor, so please just follow the Tiltify QR code in the bottom right and donate whatever you can, even if it's just a couple of quid. It would be amazing to hit my goal of raising £100 for Great Ormond Street by the end of the weekend. Failing that, please just share the link, say what I'm doing, share the VODs, and hopefully other people will be able to contribute. I totally understand if you're not able to give any money right now. Life is rough. I totally get that. So I guess to wrap this up, if you've enjoyed this, please make sure you follow me on Twitch and YouTube. I'm at DC Bradshaw on both, and I stream in parallel on both of them, so you may be watching this on either or both. If you want to follow me on social media, the best place to find me is on Blue Sky at dcbradshaw.com and also on Threads at DC Bradshaw. This is a charity endeavour, but if you do want to contribute to me personally, I do have a Ko-Fi or Ko-fi, however you want to pronounce it, ko-fi.com/DC Bradshaw. You're most welcome to follow me there if you like. And you can donate small amounts of money or monthly if you so like. But honestly, right now, I just want to be raising money for Great Ormond Street. So don't worry about me. If there's money to spare, please donate it to charity instead. We'll see if there's anyone about for the raiding. I don't believe there is. I think it is a quiet night. So I think we will call it. Like I said, the intention is to be continuing this tomorrow evening. Time to be determined. It literally depends on what time my daughter settles down to sleep. But I imagine it'll be a similar sort of time to this. So I imagine we'll end up starting sometime between 8 and 9. But we shall see. We shall see. Okay, I think that's it then. Thank you again so much for joining me. We won't be doing any raiding, though it would be appropriate, considering we're talking about piracy. So for those of you in the UK or nearby, I wish you a very pleasant evening and sleep well. All right. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.